Okay, so today we are talking about a game that some of you are familiar with and some of you are not familiar with. Now, if you've watched my channel since the beginning, you'll probably remember me doing a video on this game before, and you'll probably know me for being a huge fan of the game back then, and that game is The Last Remnant. Now, The Last Remnant is an Xbox 360 game. It also got released on PC, but I never played the PC version. I only have the Xbox 360 version. And the problem is that in order for me to capture footage, I would need a capture card. So I never got to cover this game on my channel. But I did get to put the game's music on top 10 lists. So I wanted to make one of these videos or podcasts or whatever the hell you want to call it. I don't really know what to call these anymore. Let's talk is what I'm calling it. Let's talk about games is basically what I'm doing right now, where I don't have to record any footage. It's just you listening to me talk about a video game. That's what I'm doing now. If you haven't already guessed, the reason why I'm doing this is simply to essentially cut recording and editing out of content and just have content where I'm just talking off the cuff about a video game in the style of a podcast. That's the idea, and that's kind of where that's kind of what I'm looking to do going forward because I want to do this. I think this is more fun for me, and I think some of you might be interested in this sort of content. Some of you probably won't, but I'll still be considering doing the topical stuff, of course. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of a mix, but I think this is something that's important. I think that this is a good opportunity for me to talk about games I haven't talked about before because I never had the means of recording them. And given the fact that now I basically just given up on the whole editing and all of that because it's just a waste of time for me, I just feel that this is the best way for me to go forward. So, The Last Remnant is a 360 game. I think it released in 2008, if I recall. It's either that or 2009, one of the two, but it's a very interesting game. Now, back in the day, I was a huge fan of The Last Remnant, but you've got to remember that I was very young when I played this game. I was in my teenage years, and I hadn't played that many JRPGs back then. I'm just going to be honest. This was one of the few JRPGs that really stuck with me and really kind of gave me something that was that was completely different to me that I wasn't really used to at the time. And it's definitely a game that, looking back at it in retrospect, it has a lot of issues. But at the same time, this game has so much untapped potential that it's almost criminal for me to forget about this game. And really, I am really conflicted. I'm going to be honest, this is a game that I'm extremely conflicted on nowadays. I mean, I know that I used to really love this game, and you can't say that obviously the game is terrible because I did have some love for it, obviously. But I feel that over time, I've started to see the flaws in the game, and I feel that as a gamer, I have changed so much. And because of that, I don't think that I could go back to The Last Remnant. I'm just going to be honest, people. This is a game that I played back in the day at the right time, and I enjoyed it back then. It's a happy memory for me. But would I go back to this game and enjoy it? Probably not. And the reason why is, well, it's got old school turn-based combat. I've already talked about this before. But the thing about this game is that not only does it have that style of combat where you have to select the commands for every single, well, not just party member in this game, like every single squad. You basically have a really unique combat system in this game that is just so complex, and how do I even begin talking about this game's combat? There's so many layers to The Last Remnant. It is definitely one of the most ambitious games ever made. It really is. I mean, there's not really many JRPGs that are as ambitious as this. Like, there really isn't. Like, I've always believed that the perfect, like, the perfect combat system would be a combination of Valkyrie Profile 2 and this. Like, I have this in my mind. I have dreams at night, people, dreams where I'm like imagining like the same sort of thing as this, but it's Valkyrie Profile. So I'm like, you have like the sort of like, but it kind of like you have like moving around obviously, but you're like controlling different squads like this, so you're controlling large groups, and then you have another large group and another large group, and then basically like you have this whole tactical thing, and then you're moving them on the field, and then eventually it's like it plays like Valkyrie Profile, and like it's like I feel that if they combine Valkyrie Profile 2's combat system with this, it would be incredible. I know it sounds crazy, and it probably would be a mess and hard to balance. And I wouldn't like to be the one making it, but I like to believe it would work. I'd like to believe someone out there could make it work, but obviously we live in the modern era when game developers are pussies. So obviously we can't get good games anymore. So as a result, we know that'll never happen. But the thing is, the Last Remnant dared to do what other games did not do with its combat system, and that was to try and really like make it as unique as possible, and trying to like make a really like it tried to like, how do I describe it, like it tried to create these large scale battles, but in a turn based combat sort of way, and that's something that no other game, like at least no other like non-tactical. I mean, there's tactical RPGs that do this, and there's games like Suikoden that kind of do similar things. But no game has really gone all out and focused entirely on just being like this, but in a turn-based combat system that is a traditional one. Unfortunately, it's like the old-fashioned way, which is the biggest problem. If this was like, if this was individual character, like, or if each individual squad had its own turn, because you have squads in this game, had its own turn that you select, and then they do their action, and then it moves on to the next. That would have been better, instead of like having to select the command for this, then for this, then for this, then for this. I really hate that. But unfortunately, that's how the game works. Now, here's the deal. The Last Remnant is a messy game. It is. I think it's too ambitious for its own good in a lot of ways, and it shows. Like, the first problem with the game, at least in the Xbox 360 version, is that all the equipment that you get and all the character management in the game is essentially exclusive to a single character, and that character is Rush, the main protagonist. Now, you can basically customize Rush however you like, and if you get a weapon, you can equip it to Rush, and if you get armor, you can equip it to Rush, and essentially you can give him all the best gear in the game. The problem is, every other character, you can't really manually build their character. You'll occasionally get moments where you can like choose their specialties and like specializations or whatever the hell, and you can kind of like tell them to go a different path or a certain path and stuff, but you can't manually like manage the characters, and that is a huge bummer. Like, I really was not a fan of that. And when it came to equipment, they had their own equipment, so if there's a weapon that they use and like they want it, like usually when you get that weapon after a fight or something, like they'll ask for it and you can give it to them, and you should. Every time that any teammate asks for a weapon, you give it to them, because that's the only opportunity you have of them actually improving their equipment, as otherwise they won't. And the problem with this is there's tons of equipment in this game that you can purchase and like synthesize and all of this, but only Rush can equip it, which is the biggest problem with the whole game. So like, I really wasn't a fan of that. Now apparently there is a way to do it in the PC version, but I never played that version. But that was one thing that did bother me. Another thing about this game that's kind of interesting is it uses a battle rank system. So basically, similar to God Hand, if you level up in The Last Remnant, the game gets harder. in a way, what makes The Last Remnant really unique is the fact that the more you accomplish in the game, the harder the game gets. It rewards you for playing well by making the game more challenging and difficult. Whereas if you don't play well, the game isn't half as difficult. But at the same time, it can still be difficult because of how it's like how the levels, well, how stat gains work and everything else. And if you don't understand what you're doing, it's still going to be really difficult nonetheless. It's a game that you really have to and dare I say, use a guide to figure out what you're supposed to do in order to make your life easier, or you'll have a really hard time. And there's not an easy way to figure The Last Remnant out. There really isn't. It's a really complicated game, but I would say that if you're playing without a guide, then you are getting you are still getting a great experience nonetheless. You're just going to probably get a bit of a frustrating experience. I'll just say that. If you want to suffer, then don't use a guide, and you can still suffer. I'm not saying that it's impossible to beat The Last Remnant without a guide. It is very much possible to beat it. It's just going to be a lot harder. But some of you might actually like that challenge, and for those people, more power to you. I mean, this is definitely not an easy JRPG unless you know how to break it and abuse the way its levels work and stuff. But I never did, and I just went through it without knowing, and the game was balls hard. This game is one of the hardest JRPGs I've ever played in my life. It is. This game is brutal. This game will absolutely destroy your ass. It will, and some of the bosses are just relentless. They really are. Some of the bosses are just ridiculous, and because the fights are just such large scale fights, the spectacle is there, and that there's so much to really like about the idea of what this game does with the the tension of each fight that you have and all the scenarios and how the morale's constantly changing and the back and forth, and the game's built around this. Even the audio's built around this because the music changes when the morale gets back up. You hear Turn the Tide play, which kind of play the battle music just switches to Turn the Tide, and then you just get this epic guitar solo, and it's just yeah, it's awesome. And yeah, then you'll get music that's different from when your morale's going down, where it becomes panicky music. And I really like that touch. That's one of the things I love about The Last Remnant. I mean, I love the soundtrack of this game. If there's one thing this game does right, if there's one thing this game does extremely well, more than anything, if there's one thing that I can say about this game that is the biggest standout, the best, the single best thing about this game, the one thing that is done perfectly, it's the soundtrack. The soundtrack of this game, it is phenomenal. This game has the second greatest soundtrack of all time. There you go. The only soundtrack that beats this is Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria. I'm serious. This game's soundtrack is fucking insane. I mean that. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. Valkyrie Profile 2 has that's my personal favorite, and I don't think anything will change. That soundtrack is just something else. But the thing is, it's very different from The Last Remnant. What Valkyrie Profile 2 focuses on is not the same thing that The Last Remnant focuses on. Valkyrie Profile 2 focuses on more relaxing music and serene music, whereas The Last Remnant, it's all about metal, just pure metal and techno and electronic stuff. And it's just I love The Last Remnant for what it does. I just love I love Valkyrie Profile 2 for what it does, and I love The Last Remnant for what it does. I mean, realistically, they both are kind of on par, but in different ways. It's just a preference, really. I personally prefer Valkyrie Profile 2, just simply because overall, I just think it is a better soundtrack. Because there are some songs in The Last Remnant that I really don't care about, but I think the best way to describe The Last Remnant soundtrack is it has the highest of highs, but it does have a few, low lows, and yeah, whereas Valkyrie Profile 2 never has any low lows. I mean, the lowest out of all of the music is probably the Turgid Mine, and even that's not that bad. It's kind of in the middle. There's nothing that feels really bad. Well, in The Last one, there are a few songs that are just kind of it's kind of boring, you know. Like, I just feel that Valkyrie Profile 2 soundtrack is more consistent in quality. And even Turking Mine, it's still a really good song for what it's doing, and I still kind of like it, even if it is because it's still very involving, and they still try to Motoi Sakuraba still try to put a lot of work into that song, and you can tell that he's trying to really create this feeling and atmosphere with it. It's just not the one that stands out the most to me in the game, personally. But nevertheless, the last Remnant soundtrack has the highest of highs. I mean, some of the fucking guitar music by Tsuyoshi Sekito is fucking phenomenal. Like, it is fucking orgasmic. Like, I just cannot stress it enough. If you like metal, this is the game for you. This is the most metal soundtrack. I mean, I've heard some metal soundtracks from games like fucking Sapphire on PC Engine, fucking of F-Zero X, you know. Honestly, even the Sword of Eteria, like, I mean, the thing is, I know that I put the Sword of Eteria on number 1 on my metal list, but honestly, like, I had a stipulation that I couldn't put boss music or anything like that in the list. Why? Because if I did, this game's music would be on the list. This game has such a fantastic soundtrack. I cannot stress it enough. Just everything about it, like, the fucking music just sounds so fucking epic, and it makes sense because you're fighting wars in this game. This isn't just battles against regular enemies, but even when you're fighting battles against, like, regular enemies, like a bunch of insects, like, you fight, like, the battle music just sounds like you're fighting the most epic battle of your life, and it's just like, you're just fighting a couple of, like little, like, insect enemies, and it's just, like, it's so hilarious at the same time as being fucking awesome, like. And then you get into the actual wars, and my god, like, it just feels so fucking epic. Oh my god, like, it's one of those you have to see it to believe it sort of games. But they definitely got one thing right, and that's the sense of scale. I mean, that's the thing that this game does the best. In, like, musically, in terms of the aesthetics, and in terms of, like, the lore, and in terms of, like, the combat. The scale is immense. There's so much to this game in terms of scale. What it doesn't do well is execution. Like, this game has everything going for it, like, in terms of, like, conceptual scope. Like, it really does. Like, you've got a world that really feels fleshed out, has so much lore, has so many interesting ideas, and, like, it feels like they really took a lot of care to try and make this world feel huge and full of life, and, like, they really did try to make a really interesting world with this game. But it ends up being forgettable and falls flat just simply because of the fact that it just doesn't really, like, how do I put this? I feel that the story in this game isn't terrible. I think the story in this game is actually pretty decent. I actually think the story is really good, but it doesn't really go into, like, fully exploring everything. There's so many layers to this game, and I think the biggest problem with it is just how much you can miss in this game. Like, if you just follow the main story of this game, you are missing more than half the game. I am not even kidding. There's so much side content, and each of this side content unlocks new areas that are basically all side areas that you basically, if you just played the main story, you just wouldn't even reach. And some of those areas are completely missable. Some of those areas you really need to explore to find them. And that's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that it rewards exploration, but it's a curse in the sense that you probably, like, if you're going to rush through the game, you're going to miss it all. You know what I mean? And I think that they really, like, had this game not been so flawed in the gameplay department, I think they could have really gone a lot further with this game and kind of made a series out of it. Because there's so much about it that is it feels like a really well built world for like a standalone game. Like, you wouldn't think a standalone game would have a world that tries to build, like, have so much lore in it and so much going on. Like, it really does feel like they are trying to create, like, establish a franchise with this game. But this is it. This is the end of it. This is all we got. And I think that the game ultimately story wise is a solid story. It's like it's not my favorite story ever, but it's still a solid one. I mean, it keeps you interested. But I think the thing that makes this game work the best in terms of the story is the cutscenes. Like my god, like the cutscenes in this game, they all really do a fantastic job of kind of like of just showcasing like everything. I mean, The Last Remnant has one of my favorite cutscenes in game. No, The Last Remnant has my favorite cutscene in gaming. Forget one of it has my all-time favorite cutscene in video games. Like the cutscene that plays after you finish the Nest of Eagles mission is the greatest cutscene in gaming. I don't care what anyone has to say. It's better than Onimusha 3's intro. I don't care. It fucking is. It absolutely is like better than Onimusha 3's intro. That fucking cutscene that plays after the Nest of Eagles mission is so fucking good that it was worth the price of admission just buying the game just so I could see that cutscene. Like, that cutscene puts so many other video game cutscenes to shame. It really does, and it's peak cutscenes. Like, you can't, like, it makes Warcraft 3's cinematics look pathetic by comparison. It really does. Like, oh my god, like, I just cannot stress it enough how amazing that cutscene is. It's the most badass thing you'll ever see in your life. I mean that. It is the most badass thing you'll ever see in your life. Just, if you look it up, well, I'm not going to say, if you play the game and you beat the Nest of Eagles mission, which is the thing, and once you finish that mission, the cutscene will play. That cutscene, when you watch that cutscene, you'll see exactly what I mean. That cutscene is just so fucking good. It's so fucking good, man. Oh my god. But either ways, like, I think the story is pretty good. I think that there are times where I do feel that it could be a little bit more exciting, but at the same time, I kind of get what it's going for. It's trying to kind of like go through all of this, like, it's trying to go for a similar sort of like, how do I put this? Like, it's trying to focus less on supernatural stuff and more on like the political side of like things and all of that lot, and like it's kind of like you spend a lot of time like in Athlum, like with like the Marquis, and like kind of like in discussions with the Marquis about what to do next, and like visiting other nations and having meetings with them and stuff. And it's like, yeah, like it's not really like going on this exciting adventure, you know what I mean, sort of story. And yeah, that story's not for everyone, and I can kind of see how that can be problematic. But when it gets good, it does get good. It does. There are some really memorable moments in it, and I think by the end, it's a really enjoyable one. And put simply, the story did leave an impact on me to some degree, especially by the end. I just feel that it felt like something was missing. It felt that it was almost there. It needed a little tiny little bit more like of something is what I'm gonna say. Like, I think like some of the characters are really good and really well written, but some of the characters needed a little bit more, at least in the main story. Like, I can't really speak about all of the side content and whether or not it fleshes the characters out, but in terms of the main story, like, there's only a few characters that really are done well. Some of the characters are just kind of there, and I think that's the problem. There's a lot of characters in this game, but not so many in the main story. It's like Valkyrie Profile 2 where you have Einherjar. There's a lot of like mercenaries that you can recruit, and they're just kind of like the Einherjar from Valkyrie Profile 2 where they're just there to fill in space, and that's it. I mean, some of them have quest lines that are connected to them, so you can learn more about them and all of that, but at the end of the day, it focuses on the main cast. Well, the narrative does anyway, and like some of the cast are just kind of like there. Like, for example, you know, Torgal, it would have been interesting if he had more like a little bit more like development, or like there was more to his character. You get to learn more about him and stuff, and like how he came to like fight with this four-armed fighting style, and like his race, and like there's a lot of races in this game. Like they really create all these interesting races and stuff. Like it would have been interesting if they really put a little bit more into the characters overall, like Bolson and all that. I think the best characters in this game, like at least in the playable ones, are like I know what the best character in this game is, and that's the villain. The villain in this game is the best. That's just not even up to debate. The villain in this game is one of the most badass video game characters of all time. But either way, the best characters in this game are David and Emma. Those are the two best characters in the game. David is definitely one of the more interesting ones for sure, because of what he's going through, and it's more about his story really than the actual main character Rush, because you're basically witnessing him struggle to like maintain a kingdom in times where it's kind of like where there's a lot of conflict over remnants and stuff, and yeah, like he's trying to also do the right thing, and he's trying to balance his kingdom's like safety with doing the right thing, and it all causes problems and stuff, and yeah, like whereas Rush is just kind of like your typical like generic protagonist who just trying to save his sister, and he's very selfish, impatient, and yeah, he's just gonna kind of like do everything himself. He's kind of impulsive, and you know, like goes his own way. And like David is kind of like the more sensible kind of guy who's kind of like has to like rescue his stupid ass from doing stupid things. Like David is more calculated. He knows how to deal with different situations, whereas Rush is inexperienced and impulsive. So he kind of gets. I mean, that's hence the name Rush. He just rushes into things without thinking. And yeah, like David is kind of there to kind of keep them organized, and whilst also trying to reassure him that everything's going to be fine, whilst also trying to balance the fact that he's running a nation that is under threat, and his actions ultimately impact his nation, and he has to balance all that. And I think that's a really cool idea for a narrative. Then you have Emma, and she's a badass straight up, and she's no nonsense. She's violently loyal, and like she's kind of got these motherly qualities to her, but at the same time she's an ass kicker, and she doesn't hesitate to like scold people that are basically being idiots and like causing problems for David and all that. And yeah, like it's a really interesting cast of characters when you think about it. Those two characters, David and Emma, are really interesting, and the characters you don't really see that often in video games. Rush is kind of He's just kind of like a generic JRPG protagonist, really. Like Arena is also pretty generic as well. Like she's kind of there. Like like she's just. I don't know what to say about Arena at all. Like her character is just not good. She's definitely the weakest character in the game, if you ask me. Like they really could have done a better job with her. She never really grows beyond just being that like weak, like sort of like sister character. Like I don't know, like they don't really do anything much with her other than make her the damsel in distress in the first half of the game, and in the second half of the game she just tags along because she's like, I'm not useless, I can fight, and you're just like, okay, well, join the army and lead a squad of dudes. It's just like, yeah, she's just kind of there. I think that's basically it, you know. Like, I mean, obviously you have Torgal. Torgal is like, he's pretty cool looking character, you know, but there's not really too much to say about him. Pegasus is just another one that's just kind of there. Like, he really is just kind of there. Like, he's supposed to be like the wise guy, but he's not. There's not really much else to him, really. And yeah, then you got Blockter, who's just basically just like the guy who just wants. He's just kind of like the Diane Way of the game, who's just kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna just smash everybody, and yeah, that's it. That's basically the main cast of the game. So yeah, like obviously there's other characters that you can like recruit in the game through side quests and stuff, and like you can like obviously encounter other antagonists, other NPCs, and all this stuff, and like you as you progress through the game, you learn all about like the different remnants and stuff, and like how each city, like each nation has its own remnant that represents it, that protects it, and like they all like it's like kind of like their nation's pride in a way. And yeah, it's kind of like it's really interesting how the world is designed from like a narrative standpoint. But either ways, as I say, to go further into the combat now, explaining the combat of the Last Remnant is very difficult. So I want to get into the combat now, and the combat in the Last Remnant it's unique. How do I describe it? Obviously, it's old school turn based, and you have squads, and and when you get moves, here's the deal: you don't. The game doesn't like give you attack, defend, item, magic. You don't get all that. Instead, you get a random list of commands, and it's all randomized for you. But you get to choose which random commands you get to use, and you also get to choose like who you attack or who you like advance towards and stuff. And like depending on what you do will depend on what happens. And obviously, like you can it says like a vague statement like hit them with all you've got sort of thing, but in reality, like what in reality you do actually have like the ability to like swap between like the set of commands that you're going to do with it, so you can see what commands you're going to do beforehand. So don't let that bother you, but you can't like all the commands are going to be randomized, and there is a play it by ear option as well, which is just to randomize everything. And then you select the commands, go to wherever you're going to go to, and then you basically select begin, and then you watch everything happen, and then suddenly you get involved in like in deadlocks, interceptions, and multi-deadlocks, and all of this stuff. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys, I never really fully understood how to utilize all of this stuff. I mean, the one thing I will say about deadlocks is that they are basically if you and an opponent meet face to face, that's a deadlock. So if you're locked in battle, you can't change target until the enemy unit is down. But you can technically, but if you do so, it'll put your squad at a disadvantage, and then they'll get ambushed by by the enemy, and the enemy will have an advantage. There's also flank attacks and all that stuff. So yeah, you basically have to be very careful if you're going to push an offensive, because you have to commit to it. Whereas if you stay back, you're mostly going to be safe. But enemies can still go for you, but they may have to, as I say, like if you're far away, you have to advance anyways. But it's kind of like advancing towards an enemy to attack them is risky business, basically. Because if you advance towards an enemy, then you are stuck in the fight with that enemy. But enemies can always go to you anyways, so it's kind of like, well, yeah, like you have to kind of like it depends on what you find. Like in certain fights, you really don't have much choice, but like usually you want to have someone at the back healing everybody, whilst you have other squads deadlock, so that they can kind of like tank for you. There's also the possibility of having smaller squads, smaller squad numbers, where you only have like 3 squads instead of 5. And like doing that might be better, because I feel that when you have like smaller squads, you tend to get better stats. Well, not stats, but you tend to have like more health and stuff like that, because like in my experience. And yeah, but the problem is that you can't control like the map. They can't control the field, because you can't deadlock to tank and all that lot. So, and eventually you're going to encounter fights where you're just going to be overwhelmed completely. And yeah, they're problematic no matter what you do. So basically, you just kind of have to like make the best of what little you have and hope and pray that it works. And there are moves in the game that you can utilize to your advantage. You can definitely use heal moves. There's some special moves that you can do that like that eventually you'll see some that glow, and it all depends on things like morale and stuff. Like if you reach a high enough level of morale, you'll have a higher chance of getting these moves, these special moves that do ridiculously high damage. And some of these moves, like David's like special move, like one of David's special moves can like cover like his gay ball can like cover the entire field and hit every single squad, like enemy squad on the map, and it's pretty epic to watch. The attack animation for that is just fucking awesome. Yeah, like so there are some moves that you can really utilize, but it's all kind of like it's sort of like playing Bat and Chaos a little bit, where it's kind of like random in what you draw. So you have that RNG factor to it, just like Bat and Kaitos. But it does sort of work. It does. I'm not saying it doesn't, but yes, the RNG can be a bitch sometimes when it doesn't go your way. And with the morale factor being a thing as well, it kind of gets annoying sometimes. And yeah, like I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I don't really understand this combat system. So me talking about this combat is just gonna be just like it's just going to mislead people if I talk too much about the combat. All I'm going to say is it's very ambitious, it's very interesting, but at the same time it's very difficult to really comprehend and get my head around. And it's I would say from a perspective of someone who doesn't know what the fuck they're doing, this is a combat system that can be enjoyed if you're willing to take some punishment from failure due to not understanding the combat. But sometimes in a way that's for the best. I mean, this game is violently inherently complex, but I suppose in this case it's the inherent complexity that kind of makes it fun. The fact that you don't know anything that's going on is kind of the fun factor, but it's also worrying because if you do know what's going on, then maybe the game isn't as good as you think it is, you know, and it's kind of one of those situations. Inherent complexity is something that I usually don't like. I usually shun inherent complexity. I usually don't like encourage it because it leads to situations where when you understand it, you've basically won the game, you know. Whereas like emergent complexity keeps things interesting and stuff, and like I understand that in JRPGs you kind of need to have some inherent complexity. It's kind of inevitable in any like RPG game. It is, and I don't think it's inherently bad, but it's just I feel that in this game you are going to encounter situations where you just get your ass kicked and you have no idea what you did wrong. You don't know why you lost. You just have to keep playing, keep trying until you win. It's one of those games where you just can't. I say trial and error, but it's more trial and trial. Well, it's more error and error. Let's put it this way: it's trial and error in the sense that you keep going, but you never figure out what it is that's actually making you win. Like when you finally win, you're like, "How did I win that? I got my ass kicked so many times by this fucking boss," and then suddenly you win. You're like, "How? How did I do this? How did I finally beat this?" And you never find out. It's just one of those things, you know. It's very hard. You don't have those moments where you feel like, "Oh wow, I get it now." There's never a thing in this game. There's not really like I wouldn't say that there is like I mean I'm sure there is a learning curve, but at the same time it's an invisible learning curve. It's kind of like it's very hard to learn how to play the game, and even when you beat the game you probably don't know what the fuck you did, and you probably don't know how you did it. You know, you still don't know how the game works, and that's how it was for me. I beat this game without knowing how the fuck it worked, and I fucking struggled through this game. It was hard without having a clue, but I did it in the end. And that's the type of game The Last Remnant is. It's difficult. I'm sure there's people that know what they're doing and can make this game easier, but if you don't know what you're doing, this is a difficult game. But you kind of get that sense of satisfaction when you do finally beat it, though. I'm not gonna lie, you do, but you don't feel like you've learned anything. You know what I mean? It doesn't. It's kind of weird like that. Whereas a lot of games, when you finally beat it, you kind of like, I get it now. I'm getting into this. I'm learning slowly, and I'm getting better and improving. Whereas in this game, I don't feel that I don't feel that I did improve. At least for me, I never really improved at the game. I just kind of like struggled my way through it all the way up to the end. And that's kind of how the game was for me. But anyways, we're going to stop talking about like all this stuff, and we're going to get into the spoiler territory now, because we're going to talk about the story and all of this stuff, because now we're getting into business time. So, The Last Remnant. The main story of The Last Remnant is about all these nations having remnants, and they're going to war and all this, and there's conflict, and like they're basically using remnants as these weapons to maintain the peace and like prosperity of their own nations. And yeah, like they're kind of used as tools by humans to kind of improve their quality of life. But it turns out that they are sentient, and someone who goes by the name of the Conqueror is kind of like the representative of all of these sentient remnants, or the acting representative, or like self-proclaimed representative, who basically has taken it upon himself to essentially free all of the remnants from humanity and save them from the humans that are misusing them. And this person is known as the Conqueror. Now, the best way to describe the Conqueror is he is literally Vegeta and Ryo from Fist of the North Star. That's the best way to describe him. I hope I pronounced Ryo correctly. You know, like, he is literally that. Like, he is literally Ryo from Fist of the North Star and Vegeta combined. That is literally what the Conqueror is. He is the most badass character in the game, and he is one of the most badass characters in gaming. And I mean that. He really is. Like, he would literally make Ryo cry. Like, he literally probably would make Ryo piss himself. That's how fucking badass this guy is. Like, and I mean, we're gonna, like, when you first see him, obviously he's just kind of blending in with the crowd, minding his own business. He's just kind of just like, at first, obviously you see him doing something crazy, and you see him like claim this remnant, and everyone's like, whoa, how did this guy do that? And then suddenly he meets all of these officials who are just like, oh, you can't do that, and then he's just like, watch me, bitch. You know, and then they're just like, oh, but you know, well, if you don't do this, then we'll give you a remnant. Just don't take this one. And it's just like, okay, I'll listen to you. I'll be reasonable. So obviously he accepts their like request, and things remain a bit peaceful for the time being. And not for long though, because eventually it turns out that the guy who offered him a remnant lied, didn't give him a remnant, and ended up causing a lot of bullshit because, well, he's evil and he wants to use, like, I don't know, he kidnaps Irina and, like, he does a lot of, like, despicable things for his own benefit and his own gain and stuff. Like, claiming that he's helping the Conqueror out. And, yeah, he's not doing that. And, yeah, eventually the Conqueror catches on and is just like, well, fuck it, let's just go to plan B, let's just go for the original plan and just, like, claim all the remnants for myself again. And yep, that's exactly what he does. And this leads into my favourite cutscene in video games. Oh boy, like part of me just wants to like show the cutscene, but like if you want to see it, just look up Emma versus the Conqueror. Just type in The Last Remnant Emma versus the Conqueror in the YouTube search bar, and you can watch the greatest thing you'll ever see in your life. But anyways, I will describe the cutscene to you. So basically, what happens is the Conqueror launches an attack at the nest of eagles. Now, I think it might have to do with Celipole, and because you're obviously with Celipole because you're like their puppet nation, you're not an independent nation, you're kind of obligated to like fight here to stop the Conqueror's forces and all of that lot. So basically, David and everybody else and Rush and basically the entire Athlum army goes to the Nest of Eagles to fight against the Conqueror's forces, while Emma stays behind to defend the kingdom all by herself. Well, yeah, defend the nation all by herself because she's a bad motherfucker. And, but she's not bad motherfucker enough, because while all of the Conqueror's army is fighting at the Nest of Eagles against the Athlum army, the Conqueror decides to claim real estate for himself by doing it the old-fashioned way. And essentially, he walks towards the gates of Athlum, punches a hole through the big, thick iron gate like these big thick iron gates that are sturdy and designed to like prevent sieges and stuff and battering rams and like sustain a battering ram. He punches a hole through it, rips it off its hinges and throws it behind him, walks forward. The guard, obviously, that's left there to defend the nation alongside Emma, who's stationed there. Obviously, like he's trying to figure out what to do, but he also knows, let's put it this way, he's got balls. He has got balls to do what he's done, but he knew that it's his duty. He pulls out his sword, and, well, you don't really see what happens to him, but it's likely that the Conqueror put his fingers through his fucking eye sockets. Or something along those lines. And, and basically he steals his little spather. I mean, this guy doesn't need a sword. You know he doesn't need a sword because he just punched an iron gate and ripped it off his hinges. This guy doesn't need a weapon. But he picks up this weapon because Emma notices that he's attacking, that he's besieging Athlum all by himself. Like, he's literally a one-man army, this guy, bear in mind. And she charges towards him, ready to defend Athlum because she's a bad motherfucker. And to entertain that fact, and this is what I love, like, he doesn't need a weapon, but to entertain the fact that Emma is basically charging him down, and kind of to, like, mock Emma in a way, and also kind of out of respect simultaneously, he picks up a sword from the fallen soldier that he just murdered with his bare hands, and they engage in what is probably the most epic battle you will ever see in your life. Oh my god, like... And you can clearly see that the Conqueror is holding back in this fight. Like, he's taking the piss. He's been playing with her. He's messing with her. He's basically using a sword just simply because he wants to entertain the idea of having a sparring match with this woman, who's clearly trying to defend her nation because he's going to cause problems and steal the Remnant, which is the Valeria Heart. So she wants to protect the Valeria Heart from him because that's her nation's pride, and yeah. But obviously the Conqueror, he's just toying with this woman. And she's a good fighter. She is a veteran fighter. If you play the game, you'll know that she's a badass and that she's a general of the Anthem army. She knows how to fight. She's been in a warrior clan, like, who's learned being taught the warrior way through the ages. Like, she is literally a veteran, and like, he just messes with her. He toys with her like he doesn't even give a shit. Like, he's just holding back deliberately just to make a fool out of her. And it's just like, whoa. And Emma, of all people as well, that he's doing this to, but she never gives up even then. And there's even a moment where she barely scrapes his hand or something, and she kind of makes a mockery out of him. And it's like, he looks at it and he's just like, oh, I'm not holding back anymore. And then he starts getting a little bit rougher. And, yeah. Like, there's so much back and forth, like, so much incredible choreography in this cutscene. It is unreal. And, eventually the fight goes on, and obviously the Conqueror, he's got the upper hand. Like, he's still using this sword, this little spather, against her longsword, and he's just eventually just overpowering her, and, like, every time she dodges and he misses, like, the sword hits the ground, and it just, like, causes, like, this tremor in the ground from the sheer force of his big muscles just, like, smashing the ground with his sword. I don't know, like, he is so powerful that every time her sword, like, misses and hits the, like, solid floor beneath him, like, there's just, like there's tremors in the ground. He'll even, like, scrape the sword against the ground, like, this solid stone ground, and, like, it just, like, tears at all of the stone, like, stony, like, ground, and just breaks it apart, which just shows just how strong this guy is physically. He can just tear the ground apart. And the way he fights as well, like, the way he fights is just such a mockery of everything she is. She's a warrior, and he's taking the piss. Like, she'll hit him, and he's not even putting any force, but then she'll basically do this crazy move, like, she's a really skilled fighter to even keep up with him. And she'll basically cover every angle that she can against him to make sure that she can hit every blow and be as unpredictable and, as she possibly can in the fight to get, like, ideally kind of, like, with the idea of kind of, like, putting pressure on him, but she's not putting any pressure on him, and every time she thinks she is, he just uses his sheer power to, like, push her sword whack, and then just messes with her and stuff like that. And eventually, like, she eventually when after enough time passes, she eventually finally gets an opportunity to hit him, and then the moment she's just about to actually hit him with a fatal blow, he grabs the sword with his little tiny fingers and just tosses it aside like it's nothing. Like that's just how that's how badass this guy is. Like, he doesn't give a fuck, and he's taking the piss. And right after that, there's a scene, and obviously this isn't an 18 rated game. This is a 16 rated game, so it is still bloody and gory. This game is pretty gory. It is. It's pretty blood. No, not gory, but it's pretty bloody. There's a lot of violence in this game. A lot of violence. It's very violent and bloody. Like, it's on Nier's level of bloody, like, and violence. But like, after that, obviously, like, the Valeria Heart, like, uses its ability to kind of, like, attack the Conqueror. And what does the Conqueror do? Oh, he just parries it. Like, this just massive sword that is, like, the size of a fucking skyscraper, like, falls on top of him. He just parries it. Like, with his little tiny spather. And right after that, you get to see one of the most insane things ever. Like, he just picks Emma up by a fucking neck, stabs his fucking fist into her fucking breastplate, rips out, and this is the thing, he rips out a fucking tablet, but it's the tablet that controls the Valeria heart, but it's in the same place that her heart is located. Like, and you find out it's the tablet afterwards, but at the time, it looks like he's literally tearing her heart out of her fucking chest. That's literally what it looks like, and it's like, oh my god. Like, if you took away the context of, like, the tablet and all of that, of the Valeria heart, like, it looks like he's literally performing a Mortal Kombat fatality on her. It is just insane. And then you see the tablet and you're like, oh yeah, this is quite an 18 rated game. But it shows that he probably could do that if he wanted to. But he was only interested in getting the tablet so they could get the Remnant, and that's all he really cared about, freeing the Remnant, because that's his role. He's just there to liberate all the Remnants from all the nations. And yeah, he just leaves Emma to die. And that's her final moments. And it's definitely an unforgettable moment in the game, and it's one of my favourite moments in gaming. And eventually, obviously, like, he catches on to, like, Hermione, who's the other bad guy, who's the real villain, let's be honest. And he eventually, like, he punishes him and he murders him as well. And, you know, he's groveling at the Conqueror's feet, and the Conqueror's just looking at him like, what an idiot. And then as he's begging for mercy, he just steps on his hand and leaves him in a bloody mess. And when I say steps on his hand literally explodes when he steps on it, because he's that strong. And it's just like, eventually, like he sends, like, because right at this point he's got all, like, there's all these warriors that are, like, with part of the Conqueror's army, and you've fought all of them leading up to Hermione, and yeah, now all of them have been dealt with. Now you've basically dealt with everything, all of the Conqueror's main army, but he still has a bit of an army, so you do have this final fight against the Conqueror's army. I think there's this holy something battle or whatever the hell, we have to fight this dragon at the end. And right after that, eventually you have to basically track down the Conqueror to stop him. And yeah, like, the Conqueror, like, is the main villain of the game, obviously. And yeah, you get to the end and you face his final underling, who was basically evil from the start, and you knew who he was, and he was the guy, the first real villain, and he was just serving the Conqueror the whole time. And eventually you go into, like, the Sacred Lands, and you find the Conqueror, and the Conqueror basically explains his motives and all of this, and basically says, you know, like, I was just trying to save all the Remnants because they're being misused by humans, and you've been stealing Remnants and all this lot, and, like, but they're like, but, you know, like, that doesn't make it right for you to just go around and steal it. It's not yours to take. And then there's this difference in agreement, and he's just like, you know what, fuck it. If you want to stand against me, bring it. I can take an entire army out. What difference are you going to make? And then you have to fight the final boss. And this is the most interesting thing about the final boss. Not only does the final boss theme kick ass, like, the final boss theme against the Conqueror is one of the most epic final boss themes of all time. It really is. Fucking Nisus and Sismogenesis. Listen to those songs. They are epic. They are phenomenal. And there's a reason why they are. Because you're fighting one of the most badass characters in gaming. Like... And you know he's one of the most badass characters in gaming, because yes, you have to defeat his two generals, but once they're dead, you have to fight the hardest fight so far, or the hardest fight in the entire game. because it is. The hardest boss in the game is the final boss, the Conqueror. And it's just him. And this is in a game where you control not one, not two, not three, not four, not five. You control 25 people. There's 25 people in the party, so you have a control of an entire army. And throughout the game, you're fighting other armies. Like, yeah, sure, there'll be occasionally like a boss fight or something against a dragon or something where you team up with your armies to take out. And like sometimes you'll have a boss enemy and we'll have some like allied squads with him to like help him out. The Conqueror just fights you by himself. Like, it's just him versus 25 people. It's almost like a raid group in World of Warcraft is fighting this one guy. It really is like a 25-man raid in World of Warcraft. It's that sort of fight. Like, one man versus 25 men, and he doesn't give a shit. He's actually stronger than all of you combined, and he makes sure you know it. And the final boss fight is brutally hard. It's fucking insanely hard. And the Conqueror cheats. Like, he completely cheats the system. Like he gets a move that essentially lets him just have multiple turns in one. Like he can just go from one turn and then just go to the next turn and to the next turn and then to the next turn. And then you're just absolutely bloody slaughtered by him. And then eventually, like, he's just like in the red and it's like, he just like took several turns in a row and just spammed tons of like instant death moves, AoE moves, fucking like the guy is nuts. Like, there's literally a move that he has that can just instantly kill an entire squad called Obliteration, and if he uses it on a squad, if you don't dodge that move, it's instant death. Not just of a unit, of an entire squad. He can instantly kill a unit by just punching them. So, if he punches a single unit, bear in mind, unit is just a single character. If he punches a single character, it's instant death. He has instant death effects on a single punch. But just on his regular punches. And which, by the way, like, he starts the fight using the Valeria Heart, which is the remnant that Athlum had at the start. He uses that against you at the beginning. But eventually, in the later parts of the fight, he ditches his sword and he just uses his fists. And with his fists, he is stronger. And now he's able to instantly kill people with his fists. And it's just like, he has instant death capabilities with them. And the thing about it is that there's two different types of instant death. There's instant death of a unit and there's instant death of a squad. Now, squad are kind of like, it's kind of like your party members are like squads. It's like if you have 5 party members, 1 party member is a squad. Like, you select commands for your squad, not for the individual characters. But when you select a command, like, each individual character has all their commands randomized. So you'll select a command and that group of characters will like do the commands that are randomized for them. Well, he can eliminate an entire squad with one move, and that's Obliterate. And then he can instantly follow that up with an AoE attack that hits everybody. And then he can just follow up by going up to melee and punching someone and killing them instantly. You know, it's just crazy. And then he can do like a squad AoE. Like, there's different AoEs, like the squad AoEs that hit all the squad. There's attacks that hit one member of the squad, and then there's attacks that hit the entire field. And he can do all of that, and he can do like several turns in a row, which is like that and that and that, like all of those different moves, and it can leave you absolutely in a mess. Like, he is just relentless. But what a fight it is, and the battle music, man, oh my god, the music could not be any more perfect. It is probably one of the most satisfying things you'll ever go through in video game history, beating this guy. And the thing about it is, and when I say he's the hardest boss in the game, remember, well, you probably won't know unless you played Star Ocean 2, it's kind of similar to Star Ocean 2, where there's a more powerful version of the final boss. Well, in The Last Remnant, depending on how many quests you do, ultimately depends on how powerful the Conqueror is. So if you do a lot of the quests in the game and that have a really high battle rank, the Conqueror is tougher. If you do all the quests in The Last Remnant, the Conqueror is the hardest boss in the game. Seriously, he is literally on the same level as Star Ocean 2's last boss, with the limiter off. In fact, he's probably harder. Like, he is insanely difficult, and if you fight him, then he goes by the name of the Absolute Conqueror, and yeah, like, he is just insane. So, yeah, that's basically The Last Remnant. Once again, banger of a soundtrack, absolutely love the soundtrack. I mean, I should probably mention one thing, and this game kind of reminds me of Final Fantasy 12 a little, with how you move around the world and stuff, and just kind of how has all these nations. The nations and the races, it's very reminiscent of like Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy 12, and like the actual like roaming of the fields is similar to Final Fantasy 12, with the exception of the fact that there aren't any booby traps on the floor, thankfully, and that you don't have the ATP combat. Instead, you have like you're engaging enemies and then you go into like a turn-based fights, you know. So yeah, it's similar in a way to Final Fantasy 12 in that regard, but it's more like its own thing. But it's got this. If you like Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy 12, or any Matsuno game, you're probably gonna like this one. This one has a similar world to them as well. Similar, very similar to Ivalice. I would definitely say it's very close to Ivalice. It's one of those situations, and I keep getting those vibes from it. And yeah, like, so if you like that sort of game, then maybe The Last Remnant's worth checking out. But it is a very different game at its core, but it's also a very flawed game. But it's a very interesting game. If I could sum up The Last Remnant in one way, I would say that it is wasted potential. But we can't always have perfect games, and usually when a game tries to do something really unique, it ends up falling flat on its ass, because it's very hard to make games really unique nowadays. And really, what we need is people to pick up the slack and actually take what these games try to do and make them work. That's what we need more in game design. Not trying to like do things that already work. Try to make things that don't work work. That's what we need. But anyways, I've talked your head. I've talked to death about this fucking game, people. I think you're sick of me talking about The Last Remnant, so I'm just gonna call it a day with this. Thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you all later.